Today I am sharing with you the 7 things that I so wish every French beginner would know. Because no one tells you this stuff, but the truth is, if you don't get these 7 things right, you are setting yourself up for a really rough journey. Seriously, do not start learning French before you have watched these videos and let those 7 points sink in. As a French learning coach, I keep seeing intermediate students who are stuck and they come to me for help, and the reason why they are stuck and they're not progressing anymore is because they haven't been implementing these 7 things from the start. In fact, if you are an intermediate learner yourself, I still recommend you watch this video because the best time to implement these 7 things was right when you started learning French, but the second best time is now. The sooner you nail these, the faster you will actually get fluent. So let's jump right in. So the first thing that no one tells you about learning French is that it is actually a very simple process. Now that doesn't mean that it's easy, but it's very simple. It's a 4-step process, okay? And if you go through these steps and you keep going through these steps, like it's not a linear process, right? It's a process that's cyclical, so you need to keep running those steps. But if you keep running those steps, you will get fluent. And I like to call that the cell-actin-safe process because it sounds like a magic formula, cell-actin-safe. It actually stands for selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice. So that's the 4 steps, the 4 pillars, if you will, of French learning. If you do those 4 things right, selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice, I promise you, you will get fluent. And you will get fluent much faster than if you try to skip some of these or you try to make it more complicated than that. Every single French learning method which actually works, it works because it has those 4 steps built in. It might not be explicit in the way it is taught, but those are the 4 things that if you have them, you will get fluent and you will get fluent faster. So remember, cell, act, im, safe, that's the magic formula. And actually in the next 4 points, I will go through those 4 things, so we will see what they mean. But the first point that you need to remember is that it is a lot simpler than what many people make it to be, and it is a lot simpler than you think. In cell, act, im, safe, the first bit, cell, stands for selection. So it's selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice. So the first one is selection. And selection, it comes down to a very simple principle. It's just that what you learn is a lot more important than how you learn it. So in the words of Tim Ferriss, content beats method every time. So you need to very carefully select what you learn, and that is actually a mistake that is done very often in French learning methods and in French learning classes, is that they just teach you sort of general French, or there is a selection that has been made by someone else, but it's not necessarily relevant to your life, and so you waste a lot of time and effort because the selection is not actually done for you. So there is a very simple way, a very simple process that I use with my students to actually select what is relevant to you. And it's something you can do with this very simple worksheet. So I will link it down below. You can get it for free. And it explains to you the steps of selections here. And here you have the worksheet, which then serves as your roadmap for your French practice. So this is a very convenient tool. I strongly recommend you use it. I will link it down below for you. That was the second point. So remember, well, 4 steps, cell, act, im, safe. The second one, act. Act means activation. So this is a little tricky to understand. It is connected with the next point. The next point is all about immersion. And the idea is that a lot of your learning is actually going to be subconscious. And in fact, if you don't get your subconscious learning to happen, then, well, nothing will happen, because when you speak a language, when you speak English, for example, you're not thinking of every single word and whether you're going to say the, whether you're going to put ed at the end of a verb. It's all automatic, right? Because it's all subconscious. And you want your French learning to be like that. Activation is how you make that happen. So once you have selected what you need to learn, you want to activate it so that later you actually have the subconscious learning happening. And how do you activate it? Well, basically everything you do in class or every grammar exercise that you do is meant to be activation. You teach your brain, okay, this is what we are going to learn now. This is being activated, and it is very useful because the next point is immersion. You probably heard this term if you have been learning languages before. It's just the idea of being in touch with content. You can do it either in the country, you can go to France and just stay in France for some months and learn French this way through immersion, or you can also do it through what I like to call a daily French bath. And basically it consists in looking at French content, listening to French podcasts, watching French videos on YouTube, or watching French movies and so on, just for the sake of subconsciously learning the language. So I know it might sound a little bit woo-woo and difficult to understand, but believe me, you will learn, most of your French learning is actually subconscious, and you need it to be subconscious because you don't want to be thinking of every little bit of grammar or every little word, or like if they're masculine and feminine and whatnot, because you don't have time for that. You just want to be thinking of what you want to say, and then just go ahead and say it. Simple as that. So you have the activation first, which is where you learn, okay, now we are learning this verb, we are learning this particular tense, we are learning this particular set of vocabulary, and then through being in touch with French content for a prolonged amount of time, I recommend as much as you possibly can every day. And you don't need to understand everything. You actually don't even need to listen to it. It could be in your car. It could be in your background when you're doing something else. That's totally fine. It's just that you want the language to be around because you want the immersion to happen so that your brain soaks the language in, and then you just basically learn this way. So those are the two that you have. Okay, the three things we had already: selection, activation, immersion. And the fourth one, the fifth point on this list, is safe practice. Now, what do I mean with that? I mean mostly speaking practice, although you could also have some written practice if it's relevant to you, if you want to learn to write French, or if it's important to you to write French, you can also have written practice. In this particular case, we mostly speak about speaking practice because the first three steps, okay, selection, activation, immersion, these will teach you to know French passively. So that's how you learn to understand French. But you don't learn to speak until you speak. I know it sounds really, really dumb, but the only way to learn how to speak is to speak. So that's what you do in the fourth part of this process, safe practice. And why safe practice? Because judgment is the thing that will kill your French study faster than anything else. So that could be judging yourself, or that could be someone else judging you. And so it's really, really critical that you practice in a safe space, that you practice with an understanding coach or an understanding partner, or with people who really have your back and really have your best interest in mind. You want not only to have no bad consequences, right? Because, I mean, you can't just go out into a foreign country and practice the language unless you're really, really courageous, because who knows what could happen, right? So you really want to be in a situation where you're practicing with friends or perhaps with family members, if you have French speakers in your family, or if you practice with me, that's also a safe space, or also in my group programs, we hold safe spaces for the students to practice safely, because you really want to have absolutely no fear of any bad consequence, any judgment, or anything like that when you practice, because otherwise, well, that will block your ability to speak French and practice. So this is why those are the four steps, right? So selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice. And if you keep running through these steps and you keep practicing safely, you keep selecting the new things you need to learn, you keep activating them, and you keep doing your daily French bath. And by the way, I have a video about that, which I will link up here so you can learn how to do that. So we had already those 4 steps, and the first point, which was it's a very simple process, and I had promised to you 7 tips, so I have another 2. The last 2 tips on this list are more technical tips that are specific to the French language. In fact, the first 5 tips, you can also use them for any other language, but those last 2, they're absolutely French language specific. And those are the kind of things that you want to pay attention, because if you miss them, they will trip you up later down the line. You won't notice immediately that it's a problem, but it will accumulate, and then you have more and more friction, and then you stop making progress. And like I was saying at the beginning of this video, I do have plenty of intermediate students who come to me and are like, yeah, I'm not making progress, this isn't moving, I don't know those stuff, I can't speak French, help me out. And often it's because either they don't have the method that I have explained to you at the beginning of this video, or they don't have these 2 things nailed down. So the first thing, and I know it's unexpected, especially for English speakers, but genders are a lot more important in French than you think they are. In English, genders are not a big deal. Basically, long story short, you have men and women, boys and girls, and you have he and she, and that's basically all you have. But in French, every single noun has a gender, okay? So a noun is whatever describes this. So for example, a bottle that has a gender, une bouteille, that's actually feminine in French, okay? So a computer has a gender, it's actually masculine, un ordinateur. And every single noun, so love also has a gender, it's masculine. Friendship, l'amitié also has a gender, it's feminine. Every single noun has a gender. And so far you can like, okay, yeah, whatever, every single noun has a gender. Sure. Why is that such a big thing? And why is that such a big thing? It's because first, nouns come with articles almost all the time, and articles are different according to gender. Okay, so that's important. Then when you have adjectives, they will agree according to the gender, and sometimes even the verbs in some cases will have to change according to the gender of some nouns. So it's a really, really big deal. And if you don't know the gender of the nouns, you are in for a really rough ride down the line, because you will not be able to build a French sentence with correct grammar if you don't know the gender of the nouns that you're using. So learn the genders up front, really just seriously. Take those genders seriously. And when you learn your vocabulary, when you write your vocabulary down in, for example, a vocabulary notebook, I have a video that explains how to do that right here. When you learn your vocabulary, learn the genders. Learn if they are masculine or feminine. We're lucky in French there are only 2 options. Other languages have more than 2. In French there are only 2. Every single one you learn their genders. It will serve you so much. The last tip on this list, tip number 7, is also a little bit similar to this whole gender story, but it's about verbs. So verbs don't have a gender, but what they have is conjugation. Now, conjugation, if you don't know what that refers to, in English, for example, you say I buy in the present, and in the past you say I bought, and that's a conjugation, right? You say I buy, and you say he buys, and there's an S in buys, and that's a conjugation. Now, in English, there's not a lot of that. There's those INGs that fly off, and there's EDs that fly off in the verbs, but you pretty much know that intuitively, and it's okay, it's not a big deal. It doesn't look like it's a big deal, but in French, it is a big deal. I am sorry to break it to you, but in French, those verbs, if you don't take them seriously from the start, they will be a huge pain. So how do you deal with them? Every time you learn a verb, you will have to learn which conjugation types it belongs to. The good news is that there aren't that many conjugation types. Many verbs actually conjugate according to another type. You won't have to learn the conjugation for every single verb. You just have to learn a couple of types and know which types the verb belong to. I will make another video, and probably more than one other video, about verbs, because they are really tricky and they're really worth just explaining a bit more about that. And by the way, in my group program, the French Fluency Accelerator, we actually have already 2 workshops that are about verbs. There is one workshop which is 1 hour, and it explains to you everything you need to know about verbs as a beginner. So I strongly recommend you join that program if you're serious about learning French. You really need to know which types it belongs to, otherwise you won't be able to conjugate the verb. And again, just like the nouns, you won't be able to use them correctly in a French sentence. So that's a really big deal, and I really urge you to take those seriously. Learn the genders of the noun and learn the conjugation types of the verbs, because that will save you so much time down the line. Basically, if you don't do that up front, you will have to relearn those words which you've already learned later when you're an intermediate student, and that's how you just basically don't make progress. Because even though you're an intermediate student, you can't get your grammar right because you have important bits that are missing, and you need to learn a lot more before you can make progress, and you're stuck, and it's extremely discouraging. And I am very happy if you are learning this up front. If you haven't learned French yet and you're a beginner and you're hearing that before you start, you are setting yourself up for success, because no one tells beginners this. It's very rare for beginners to hear this, and I'm very happy that I get to tell you right now, because you are going to learn so much faster now that you know this. So I know that most of these are really easier said than done, but remember, it's all a process. You don't have to do it perfectly. If you strive to implement those 7 things from the get-go as you learn French, you will set yourself up for a much smoother journey than if you ignore them. So I'm really happy that you've heard them right now, and your journey ahead will be so much smoother. And by the way, if you would like me to coach you on your French learning journey, you will find all the links for that below. For now, let me recap for you the 7 points that we had on this list. The very first thing I told you is that the process of learning French is actually a lot simpler than you would expect it to be. It is not easy, but it is simple. It comes down to 4 pillars, which were the 4 next points on this list. Selection, basically not all French words and French sentences are created equal, and you want to select the ones that make more sense for you to learn. Activation is where you do exercises or you learn some grammar or something like that for the sake of being in touch with it for the first time, to tell your brain, okay, this is what we are learning now. Immersion is where most of the learning happens. It's actually a subconscious process, and all you need to do here is immerse yourself in French content, French videos, French podcasts, just so that your brain gets familiar with the things that have been activated. And finally, safe practice is the moment when all this learning, which is basically passive, you turn it into active by practicing French in a space where you have no judgment and you only practice with people who have your best interest at heart. This is really important because judgment will kill your French study sooner than anything you can think of. And we have 2 points left on this list. One thing is that you want to take genders very seriously and learn the genders of the noun from the get-go, because if you don't, you won't be able to use those nouns in sentences, and then it will actually stop you from progressing further down the line. And the same is true for verbs. You want to learn the verbs, how they are conjugated from the get-go, because again, that will stop you from using them in French sentences, and that will create a lot of friction down the line. In order to really master your nouns and your verbs, you will need to be able to learn French vocabulary successfully. And that's a little bit of an art in and of itself. And like everything, it is a lot easier to do when you have a good strategy. I share everything you need to know about this in this video, and I strongly recommend you watch it next. I will leave you to it, and I will see you next Monday.